Welcome back to History Otherwise, where we explore the paths not taken in history. Today, we're not just looking at what happened. We are looking at a ghost. We're taking our whole stack of research parliamentary records, economic data, military projections, to map out a timeline that is, well, hauntingly plausible.
It really is. It's a timeline that creates a world almost unrecognizable from our own, yet it all hinged on the most mundane details. Not magic, not aliens, but the speed of a schooner crossing the Atlantic and, a head count in the House of Commons.
We're tackling the big one today, the granddaddy of counterfactuals.
Right.
What if the 13 colonies had never revolted? What if the United States of America just remained British North America?
And to do this justice, we really have to follow the dominoes as they fall. So we've planned 3 specific stops on this roadmap. First, that pivot point in 1775, a specific political gamble in London that almost worked. Second, the 19th century, where we'll see how a unified empire handles things like the French Revolution and, of course, the explosive issue of slavery.
And finally, the 20th century. Because if you change 1776, you don't just change the map of North America, you potentially erase the world wars, communism, fascism. You end up with a hyperpower that controls the globe.
A world of imperial zenith. Immense stability, sure, but purchased at a very specific and maybe uncomfortable price.
Let's get into it. We need to transport ourselves to the Palace of Westminster. The date is February 20, 1775.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's cold, it's drafty, and the mood in London is toxic. By early 1775, you have to remember, the Boston Tea Party is in the rearview mirror. The intolerable acts are squeezing Massachusetts. The First Continental Congress has already met. If you're a betting man, you're betting on war.
And the man at the center of all this is the Prime Minister, Lord North. Now, in the traditional narrative, North is usually the punchline. He's the man who lost America. Incompetent, out of touch. But looking at the work of historian Andrew Jackson O'Shaughnessy, that caricature doesn't really hold up, does it?
No, not at all. O'Shaughnessy argues, very convincingly, I think, that this wasn't a cabinet of buffoons. Lord North was a skilled parliamentarian, a very capable administrator. He was just stuck in a geopolitical vice. He had hardliners in London demanding he crush the insolent rebels, and he had colonists screaming about tyranny. I mean, he was trying to thread a needle while riding a galloping horse.
Which brings us to the conciliatory proposition. I was reading the parliamentary transcripts you sent over, and this really surprised me. This wasn't just a rumor. This was a formal motion.
It was the Hail Mary. On February 20th, North stands up and he proposes a deal. He says, essentially, if you, the colonies, agree to tax yourselves to pay for your own defense and civil government, Parliament will forbear, their word, we will stop levying taxes on you.
It's a put your money where your mouth is offer. You want self-governance? Fine. Pay for it, and we'll back off.
Precisely. It adjusts the primary grievance. No taxation without representation. North is basically saying, fine, no taxation from us, you do it, and here's the kicker. The House of Commons passed it.
By what margin? The vote count was 274 to 88.
Right.
That's not a squeaker. That's a mandate.
It proves there was a desperate political will in London to avoid a war. They knew the math. I mean, the national debt eventually hit $250 million fighting the revolution. They were terrified of that expense. They wanted a way out.
Speaking of math, I want to pull up that fact sheet we compiled on the tax burden, because this is where the modern perception of the oppressed colonist just hits a wall. We have data showing the average annual tax rate in the colonies was somewhere between, what, 1.5% of income?
It was negligible, truly.
Compare that to the guy living in London or Bristol at the same time.
Oh, he's paying 5 to 7% plus duties on almost everything he consumes. The average Briton was paying significantly more for the privilege of being in the empire than the average American was.
So this confirms it. The revolution wasn't about economic survival. It wasn't about poverty. It was purely principle.
It was constitutional. But that's why North's offer was so dangerous to the radicals in Boston. If the issue is representation and London offers a credible path to self-regulation, the moderate majority in the colonies, and you have to remember they were the majority, they would have taken it.
So here is the split. In our real timeline, the shooting starts at Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775. The conciliatory proposition is on a slow boat across the Atlantic. It arrives too late. Blood has been spilled.
But in this deep dive, the winds are favorable. The ship is fast. The proposal lands in Philadelphia and Boston sometime in March, before any shots are fired.
And let's sweeten the pot with one more element that was being discussed in the back rooms. Actual seats in Parliament. The 30 seats plan.
Right. So the offer on the table is you tax yourselves, and we give you 30 MPs in Westminster. If you are a merchant in New York or a planter in Virginia and you're looking at your ledger, you take that deal.
You take it immediately. And suddenly, Sam Adams and the Sons of Liberty look less like patriots and more like dangerous agitators trying to start a war for no real reason.
Exactly. The moderates declare victory. Look, we forced the king to blink. We got representation. The revolution just deflates like a punctured balloon.
So 1776 comes and goes. No Declaration of Independence, just a massive celebration of the reunification of rights. The 13 colonies remain British. Okay, now we move to Section 2, the 19th century. And this is where the butterfly effect doesn't just flap its wings, it creates a hurricane.
The biggest immediate change isn't even in America, it's in France.
Because Louis XVI doesn't get to spend his entire treasury fighting the British.
That's it. We often forget that the French monarchy essentially bankrupted itself funding the American Revolution. They spent over $1 billion livres just to stick it to the British. It was a strategic victory, but a financial suicide pact.
So in our timeline, the British and Americans make up. France just sits on the sidelines.
Which means the French treasury doesn't collapse in 1789. There is no desperate calling of the Estates General to raise taxes.
No tennis court oath. No storming of the Bastille.
It's very likely the French Revolution is either delayed by decades or, it just transforms into a slow, boring constitutional reform process. No guillotine, no reign of terror, and most importantly,
no Napoleon.
No Napoleon. The Napoleonic Wars, which devastated Europe for 20 years, they simply don't happen. The 19th century in Europe starts with peace and solvent monarchies.
That is hard to wrap your head around. A Europe without that scar tissue.
But let's bring it back across the Atlantic. We have this unified British Empire, but people still want to move west. You still have restless settlers looking at the Ohio Valley.
You do. But the nature of that movement changes. In the U.S. timeline, Manifest Destiny was chaotic. It was settler-driven. You move out, pick a fight with the indigenous tribes, and then scream for the army to come save you.
It was the Wild West.
The British Crown hated that. They prioritized stability and trade above all else. So instead of the Wild West, you get the tame West. Think about how Western Canada was developed. It was driven by the Mounties and the Hudson's Bay Company.
So slower, much slower, and more bureaucratic. Its expansion by treaty and regulation, not by vigilante posses. Now, it's still colonial. Let's not pretend it's a utopia for indigenous peoples. But it likely avoids the sheer scale of the genocidal wars we saw in the American timeline. The Crown wanted subjects, not cleared land.
It sounds more orderly, but maybe less dynamic. But eventually you run into the wall. The one issue you can't compromise away, slavery.
This is the collision course. You cannot have a unified moral and legal empire with two completely different economic systems. Historically, the British Empire abolished slavery in 1833.
Right, which is 30 years before the Emancipation Proclamation.
Exactly. So in this timeline, Parliament in London passes the Slavery Abolition Act in the 1830s, and they expect it to apply to Virginia, Georgia, and the Carolinas.
The South is not going to accept that.
No way. They would view it as a violation of their property rights and their special status within the empire.
So we still get a civil war.
I think it's unavoidable, but the teams are different. It's not the Union versus the Confederacy. It is the British Empire versus a Southern rebellion.
The tactical situation there seems, lopsided.
It's hopeless for the South. In our Civil War, the North had to build a navy from scratch. Here, the Royal Navy, the most powerful maritime force in history, is already there. They blockade Charleston and Savannah on day one.
And the Redcoats.
You have the British regular army, plus loyalist militias from New England and Canada, all descending on the South. And critically, there is zero chance of foreign help. In our timeline, the South hoped Britain or France would intervene. In this timeline, Britain is the enemy, and the rest of Europe is already turning against slavery.
So it was a short war.
Brutal but short. The rebellion is crushed. Slavery is abolished by imperial decree, probably by 1840.
That changes everything. The demographics of the continent, the economy, and it solidifies this massive political entity. I know Robert Sobel wrote that fascinating fictional history, For Want of a Nail, where he tries to map this out. He imagines this Confederation of North America becoming this complex industrial beast.
And Michael Flynn in The Forest of Time, he warns of the opposite, that without a strong union, the continent could just fracture into warring statelets. But in our scenario, the Crown provides that gravity. By the time we hit the late 19th century, you have a unified transatlantic juggernaut.
Which leads us to Section 3, the 20th century. This is where the scale gets almost sci-fi.
We enter the era of the imperial zenith. By 1900, think about what this empire possesses. It has the financial capital of London, the naval dominance of the Royal Navy, and it has the steel mills of Pittsburgh, the coal of West Virginia, and the wheat fields of the Midwest.
It's a combination of British diplomatic reach and American industrial muscle. It's unchallengeable.
The historian Elie Gould talks about this concept of the British nation, this idea that people on both sides of the ocean saw themselves as one people. In this timeline, that identity just hardens. You don't have Americans, you have British North Americans who feel just as much ownership of the empire as someone in London.
Okay, so 1914, the Archduke gets shot in Sarajevo, the alliances trigger, Germany moves. What happens?
In our reality, World War I was a stalemate because the sides were pretty evenly matched, and the U.S. sat out for 3 years. In this reality, the empire is involved from the first second.
And it's not just sending a strictly British expeditionary force.
No, it's sending millions of men from North America, backed by the full industrial capacity of Detroit and Chicago immediately. Germany is facing a wall of steel.
They can't compete with that.
The war doesn't last 4 years. It might last 6 months. It's a decisive, crushing victory for the empire.
And here is the deep dive insight that really just stops you in your tracks. If the war ends in 1915,
then the 20th century, as we knew it, is canceled.
walk us through that chain reaction.
Okay, first, Russia. The Tsar was overthrown because the war dragged on, starving his people and breaking his army. If the war ends in 1915, the Russian army is still intact. The economy hasn't collapsed. Lenin remains in exile in Switzerland, writing angry pamphlets that no one reads.
So, no Soviet Union, no communism as a global state power.
Second, Germany. In our timeline, the Treaty of Versailles humiliated Germany and destroyed its economy, which, created the vacuum for Hitler. If the war ends quickly, there is no total collapse. There's no hyperinflation. Hitler remains a failed artist and a disgruntled veteran with no audience.
No Nazis.
No Nazis.
No Holocaust.
No World War II.
It's just staggering. You're describing a 20th century that is peaceful.
It's a Pax Britannica on steroids. The 20th century is usually remembered as the bloodiest century in human history. In this timeline, it's a century of stability, trade, and gradual technological progress.
But, and here's the but we have to confront in the outro, what is the world actually like? Because it sounds a bit sterile.
That is the trade-off. It is a world of immense stability, but it is monolithic. You have one dominant culture, one dominant political system, the constitutional monarchy.
You lose the American idea.
You do. Think
Correct.
about what the United States represents, for good and for ill. It was a messy, violent, chaotic experiment. It broke the mold. It said, we don't need a king. We can build a government from the bottom up.
You the people.
That idea was infectious. It sparked revolutions across Latin America, in Europe, in Asia. It guaranteed a world of many nations, of competing ideologies.
Democracy, republicanism, even the radical stuff. It all came from that initial fracture.
Exactly. In our history otherwise, the mold never breaks. The world is a well-tended English garden. It's safe, it's orderly, the hedges are trimmed, but you don't have the wild forest. You don't have the radical liberty that comes from starting over.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Is the bloodshed of the 20th century the price we paid for diversity and freedom?
Or, to flip it around, is the freedom to have world wars and genocides worth it? If you could push a button and trade the American Revolution for a peaceful 20th century, no Holocaust, no gulags, would you do it?
I think most people would hesitate to say no.
I think they would.
It really makes you look at our current map differently. We take the existence of the United States for granted. We assume it was destiny.
But it wasn't. It was a roll of the dice, a few votes in London, a wind shift in the Atlantic.
Because history might have turned otherwise.
Indeed.
And that is where we will leave it. A massive thank you to everyone for listening to this deep dive. We hope this gives you plenty of ammunition for your next dinner party debate.
Just don't get into a duel over it.
Fair advice. We will catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.